I told her, I was like, I'm afraid that I'm afraid that the people that I love are going to leave me. And when I said it out loud, like the moment I finished speaking it, I saw myself at the door. But I'd never tied those two together before. And it was at that moment that I realized, like, yo, this is still a thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, this was 1984, but this is still a very present thing. And so
Welcome back to my channel, Inspiring Beauty and Believers. I am Song, and today I have a guest with me. This is Courtney, and we're going to talk about parental abandonment. So I wanted to really dig into getting a male's perspective on how they deal with this, because a lot of times we hear from women, but we don't really know how men interact with their families after they've gone through this parental abandonment. So, Courtney, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
To what extent?
Okay, so you are your father now. You have 2 children. You're married.
Yep.
I should have led with you're married. You're married, and you had 2 children. So you grew up with your mother, but not your dad.
Correct. So my mother and my father were never really like together. So I saw my father twice. Once sometime when I was around 6 months, so I'm told, and then again when I was about 5. I remember spending a weekend. A weekend. It may have been like 4 or 5 days, but I just remember it, being a couple of days. He lived in California. I was born in California, but I grew up in Michigan. Somehow I ended up back in California for a visit. I remember staying the weekend, going to Disneyland, everything you would do with your kid if he was coming to California and you lived in LA area. And then that was the last time I saw him. I talked to him when I was 6, sometime around Christmas. And then we lost contact until I was 24 after I got out the Army.
And so being that you do remember that experience of seeing him when you were 5 and talking to him when you were 6, how did that affect you growing up, knowing that you had a father somewhere out there, but you didn't have contact with him?
When you're going through it, you don't really know any different. So, and then, what I'm saying, in my neighborhood, most of my friends, their dads weren't around, so it wasn't abnormal. I didn't feel like the black sheep because my dad wasn't there. If anything, I felt like it helped me fit in because I looked like me in a neighborhood of people who look like you. So there's one more thing I tried to have in common with people, to be honest, from an acceptance perspective. I think the biggest thing in retrospect with not having my father around was that I didn't have anyone like me to identify with. So I didn't want to look like me, which I think was a big deal. You know what I'm saying? Like, my name is Courtney and I grew up in the 80s. So it's not like that was a very common name for boys. It's still not a common name for boys, but definitely not back then. And then we moved around a lot. So I was always the new kid. So being a new kid, having a both way / girl name, whatever, and then looking like me, but talking like me, from a family of people who look like you, in a neighborhood of people who look like you, in a church full of people who look like you. You know what I'm saying? It was, I think the biggest impact that it had back then in retrospect was I didn't have anybody to help me be secure in who I was as I was, because I didn't have anything to identify with. So I just continuously strived to be what everybody else was. I didn't have anything, like, there was no anchor for me to be like, yo, I'm pale and that's okay.
Right.
So I think that was probably the biggest thing. And my mom got 4 brothers, so I had uncles, I had male influences and stuff. So I don't think I went without the input of a man's voice in my life as much as I think for me personally, the identity factor was probably the biggest deal. But again, I didn't realize that then. It's something that you recognize much later.
So I've heard it said multiple times that we get our identity from our father, and you just touched on that a little bit, having that anchor in your life. Now that you are an adult, how does that fit into your role with you have two sons and really being giving them that identity? Do you ever see in your parenting issues that may come up about your insecurities you might still carry from not having that father figure or that father there?
That's an interesting question. I think for the most part, the any issues that I recognize in regards to me interacting with my boys is less of the absence of the relationship between me and my father growing up, and likely more. And this might be another topic for another time, but uh, I just turned 40 recently, and I don't know what happened. Like a switch went off around that time, not the day of, but just in that, the months leading up to. I just began to do a lot of self-reflection, and I started seeing a therapist. There's quite a few things from my childhood that I didn't realize were still affecting my adulthood. So I think if anything, any issues that I recognize between me and my boys and how I'm raising them is not so much a result of the absence of the relationship between me and my father as much as it is from an aspect of how I love myself and therefore how I love others, or the lack thereof. So in my, if you don't mind taking this road.
Oh, we could definitely go this way because I think it does tie in to that, because sometimes as children, well, when we become adults, we don't realize how much our childhood has affected us.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the interesting thing is, as a Christian, I've grown to a point where I don't have any ill will or unforgiveness towards anybody. I dealt with that very, very early on in my walk back in the early to mid 2000s. And so I thought until recently, about the last couple of months, I was under the impression that because I had forgiven the people that I was over the events. I have come to learn that I was very wrong about that. And so because I don't harbor any contempt towards the people, I assumed that I was free of the remnants or the results of, particular traumas. And my father is actually, like, my father and I actually have a really good relationship now. I think we'll always lack the bond that's established between a son and his father in those early years. By the time I got back in touch with my dad, I was 24 and he was in his early 60s. So there's a big generational gap, not to mention we grew up completely differently. My father is a old white man, and I was a 24-year-old boy from the hood. So it was a lot of relational, things that we just didn't connect on due to the lack of relationship in those early years in that bonding stage. And then, like when I was living with my mother, when I was 3 going on 4, we flew from California to Michigan. And we arrived we flew into Detroit, we drove to Jackson, we arrived at my aunt's house, and my uncle came to pick me up. And this uncle was like, he's my mom's oldest brother, so he was kind of like my dad. Like me and his son were really close as kids. He was like my brother cousin, you know what I'm saying? My brother.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, he came and picked me up. I'm like, okay, I'm kicking it, Uncle Andy, boom, boom, boom. And then when he brings me back to my aunt's house, my mom has already flown back. Everyone else knew I was staying, but nobody told me. And so I remember just bawling. I'm talking about hysterical, just at the door. Like, it's comical, but like that scene where Dino puts Fred out the house and he's banging on the door screaming Wilma, like that's how I remember just banging on the side door, just calling for my mom. And I'm sure, in your memory, it's always different. I'm sure it wasn't this long, but it felt like eternity, and it felt like they just left me there crying.
Mm-hmm.
In their defense, there was nothing they could say that was going to make me feel better. So you might as well just leave me there crying, like till I just get it all the rage out. But I didn't recognize then until years later. I was dating a young lady before me and my wife got together, and she asked me a question. She said, "What are you afraid of?" And no one had ever asked me that before. I've been in the military. I've been overseas. Nobody ever asked me what I was afraid of. And I never analyzed anything I was afraid of. Like, I don't like snakes. I'm not a big fan of ghosts and stuff. I don't want nothing touching me that I can't touch back,
Right.
But I mean, I knew what she meant. So I really kind of was introspective about the question. And I realized that I told her, I was like, I'm afraid that the people that I love are going to leave me. Mm. And when I said it out loud, like the moment I finished speaking it, I saw myself at the door, but I'd never tied those two together before. And it was at that moment that I realized, like, yo, this is still a thing. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Like, this was 1984, but this is still a very present thing. And so, and that event was about 13 years ago from now. And so, so even then I thought, okay, now that I recognize this, I can process this, and I've dealt with this, but it's still a very present issue. One of the things that I'm working through with my therapist, like, so, and as this conversation was leading up, I was just sitting here in this chair, just kind of thinking about how it may go, or, what questions may be posed. And I began to have like just more revelation. Like, there was a time where in the 3rd grade, I lived with my uncle, and there was a time in the 4th grade where I lived with my aunt. And I realized how those events, okay, let me take you back real quick. Mm-hmm. I started seeing a therapist in the first place because I asked God why I was having trouble accomplishing a couple of particular things that I had set my mind to do, but they weren't happening. And the Lord told me as clear as day. I prayed about it the next morning before I opened my eyes while I was waking up, I heard, "You don't love yourself." Mm. And so I thought to myself, that can't be God. I think I'm amazing.
I know you, so I would have never known that. Like, I'm like, oh, Courtney loves Courtney.
Listen, so I thought too. You know what I'm saying? I mean, in my mind, I have a high self-esteem and a pretty good grasp on my self-image. But I recognized as I began to think about what I know love means, that he was right. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? I know that love is not, it's my personal motto. It's a revelation that I got, that love isn't love until you give it away. Mm-hmm. So people have feelings for each other. All that's great. Love is an action. Love is a verb. Love is all about how you give. God so loved the world that he gave. It goes on to say his only begotten son, but it doesn't need to. The principle of love is that God so loved that he gave. So God so loved that he gave, and I don't give to myself. I give to everybody else, but I don't give to myself. And so I began to see a therapist because I was like, I don't know where to start in this process. I had prayed about it for weeks. I got no revelation. I asked a couple of people who I thought may have gone through similar things, and they didn't have answers. I was like, this answer has to be somewhere. And so based on the conversation that I had with my dad and another good brother of mine who recommended that I see a therapist, I began to do so. I found somebody that I trust, a professional, and we began to talk, and I explained in great detail the things that I experienced in my childhood over the course of about 4 to 6. Quite a few things all happened in a very short period, but they were traumatic. And so after explaining that, my therapist said, well, that makes sense. In your mind, how could you love yourself when all the things that happened to you during that time showed you that you had no value? I was like, I will punch you if you make me cry on our first session. So I've just really been trying to unwrap that for the past month or so. I mean, I got a session today, and it's something that I'm adamant about doing because I recognize that it's affecting it's not so much that it's affecting how I'm raising my kids as much as how it's affecting me, and then I'm affecting how I'm raising my kids. So, for instance, I feel as if uh, one of the fruits of this is that because because I've not come to grips with exactly how to love myself, I thought I was great at loving other people.
Right.
But the Bible says to love others as you love yourself. So until I get a really full grasp on what that means for me, I still feel as if my love for others is inadequate, which is something that I beat myself up about, which creates this cycle, you know what I'm saying, of me not loving myself further. So I'm in the guts of working through this process as we speak, which is why I was kind of volunteering to talk to you about this, because I think some people always want the end result, but the middle is tough. And I wanted somebody to see somebody in the middle. Like, I'm emotional talking to you right now about this, but you have to start somewhere. Like, I absolutely refuse to stay where I was. Ultimately, I realized that my life is dope, right?
Yeah.
The check marks of a dope adult life are all checked. My wife is bad. My kids are beautiful. They're smart. They're kind. They're intelligent. Our marriage is dope. I have zero complaints in my marriage. The house I had in Michigan can fit in my current house 2.5 times. I make 3-4 times as much money here now than I made before I moved out. Like, my life, church is dope. My friends are dope. My life is dope. But from the left, right limits of life, all these things are amazing, but I'm unhappy.
Right.
I'm unhappy. Things are good. I'm unhappy. And so hearing from the Lord that I don't love myself, realizing why I don't love myself, tracing back, you don't love yourself because, if you look back at it, it looks as if you had less value because you were, at time, whether a child knows what's going on or not, your brain starts to create some type of association as to why your father's not in your life, why your mother sent you to live with your uncle, why, my mom could have been having a hard time. My mom could have been trying to get on her feet financially. There's a lot of reasons that, people go stay with other family members just for a short period, just to, what I'm saying? But
right.
The kid's mind doesn't process that. And if you never process it, then you end up as an adult with all these associations that, like I said, as I sat here thinking about this conversation, I started to remember, wow, I forgot I lived here and then I lived there, both those times without my mom. Like, maybe that's why all of it together equals, yo, don't nobody want you. Your mama don't even want you. Now, of course, my mom will burn something down for me. Trust me. You know what I'm saying? But the association for me may be rooted in feeling unwanted. You know what I'm saying? And so it got to a point where I was willing to do anything just to not be abandoned. You know what I'm saying? I would hide things that I knew were wrong with me just because I felt like if you knew about them, you wouldn't want to be in my life anymore. And so instead of being transparent and being open and seeking, the help of people who love you, you hide from the people who love you because you feel as if they see this raw, uncut version of me, they won't want me anymore. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, for some people, it manifests in people pushing them away. Like, I'm going to push you away before you get a chance to throw me away. That's not me. I think more so for me, it was I would compromise myself in order to accommodate people staying in my life. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Because oftentimes when you take a true stance for something, it's going to cost you some relationships. But ultimately, the place I'm in right now is I find myself with this inner turmoil that I'm working through, battling bouts of depression from time to time, and then dealing with this, working through how do I learn to love myself. And ultimately, I think at the root of it is the who am I? How can I properly love me if I don't know who I all the way am? I got to know who that guy is in order to know how to fully love him. You know what I'm saying? And so as I'm working through that, I find myself disappointed with how I interact with my boys sometimes. Like, yo, you shouldn't have said that. You said that out of your current feeling, but you don't mean that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That's not the essence of your relationship with them, but out of how you feel right now, because you're low or you're hurt or you're depressed or you're sad right now, you said that. You know what I'm saying? So all that to say, when you talk about the effects that it's having on my relationship with how I'm raising my sons, that's where I see the most effect is feeling as if I don't necessarily measure up to the dad that I see and hear that I want to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm gonna stop and take a break before my tears fall.
You good. I love the rawness and the transparency and that's what I really wanted to get to, because a lot of times you don't hear this from men. And then especially, where you are in your life or what people may see in the public, which you're doing amazing. Like for me coming from the outside and I see you and I know you, I'd be like, Courtney got it going on. But to really hear what's going on the inside and to know that you can look inside yourself and you can see, okay, I need to seek out and get help because I'm still not over these things in my life. It's a brave and courageous thing for you to be able to share this with other people, because some people, especially men that I know, they're like, oh, yeah, I don't want to talk about this. They won't get counseling because there's this stigma that if you talk about it, then something's wrong with you. But there's something really wrong with all of us. We just bury it.
So this magnitude of transparency was hard earned. Like I said before, in times past, I would hide it. I would hide me, flaws and all. Definitely hide me. And I was I was struggling. I've never, like, glory to God, I've never had a suicidal thought a day in my life. I've never thought of it would be better if I wasn't here. That's just literally never crossed my mind. I can't imagine what people go through to get to that point. And it's not a judgment thing. It's just that I personally just cannot relate. It's just never been a thought for me. And I'm grateful because I've been in some really low places where if I did think like that, it might be a bad result. And so, but I went through some very tumultuous times in my decision making. And instead of saying, yo, friend, brother, sister, pastor, whoever, I've got these following things that are really happening in my life and I'm ashamed of them, but I also know that if I don't speak up about them, it's not going to get any better. But I didn't. You know what I'm saying? I just continued to hide it. I did my best to work on it on my own. I mean, I had keys to my church. I would go to my church. I lived around the corner from it at the time. And I would go to my church by myself, go to the soundboard, turn the music all the way up, just be at the altar 11, 12 o'clock at night by myself, just wailing, just singing my heart out, worshiping, crying out to God, like, help me, help me, help me. I know I'm doing things that don't line up with the word and who you've called me to be, but I can't seem to break myself out of these behavioral cycles. And so eventually I was confronted by some people, and I lied at first. And then I went back and told them that I lied about it because I got zero sleep that night, like not a wink. I couldn't rest with it. I was like, no, absolutely not. But that wasn't the end of it. It continued. And then ultimately, the Lord will give you warning after warning, and then sooner or later you'll be exposed. And I don't believe the Lord is an exposer for the sake of punishment, but sometimes it takes just blatant exposure in order to wake you up. And so my fear was, if I tell them, they will leave me. The result was, because I didn't tell them, they left me. And so like Job said, the thing I feared the most to come upon me, the devil played on my fear. You know what I'm saying? And so I was afraid of losing the people that meant the most to me. But because I was dishonest with them, they felt like the substance of our relationship wasn't what it was in the first place, which is actually understandable. But I was so scared of losing them that ultimately, the dishonesty is what led to them leaving me. And I wasn't like in a relationship or anything at the time, just people that were around me that I cared about.
Right.
And so because of that, it's easy for me to be transparent now. I made up my mind then that I would never find myself in that position again. I would never be in a position where I'm hurting or I'm struggling significantly, or I'm, just in something that I can't get myself out of, or whatever, and not be transparent about it. Like, look, if you love me, if you're going to be in my life, you're going to get the real. And every day is not going to be set. Like my public persona is very well kept together, because I grew up always trying to ensure that my identity was intact. And so that is almost habitual for me at this point. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't go outside with wrinkled clothes. I don't go outside with stuff that don't match. I don't even run to the store and stuff that don't match. Like, it just quick run. I don't, like, if I'm going outside, I represent me and my household. So I'm a well kept together person. I'm always well groomed. You rarely catch me outside without a fresh line and being shaven. It's not because I'm insecure. It's just because I like to present my best. It's just how my mom raised me. So because of that, instinctual presentation of myself, I seem well kept together. But all of us got stuff that we deal with. And so I'm not afraid to. I mean, the thing I feared was people would leave me. Well, I've experienced that now, and I'm still on my feet. So I'm not afraid of losing people no more. So I'm going to be transparent, and you either rock with me or you don't.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So, but I'm also not going to sit here suffering to make people feel more comfortable about being around me. Like, yo, this is who I am. This is what I rock with. This is what I struggle with. And if you can't be with me while I work through that, then I understand. I get it, and I'm perfectly okay with that. Like, would it hurt? Of course it would. You know what I'm saying? I love people. I love being around people. I'm an extrovert. So I enjoy people, but I also am not going to sacrifice myself anymore for the sake of keeping people around.
Yeah.
More water.
Get your water.
It's heavy over here, boy.
I know. I'm like, man, I need to take a moment on that, because I have nothing else to say. Like, you've shared everything that I really wanted to know about how a man deals with, those emotions of abandonment. And I'm happy for you that you are able to really be working through these things now, because I know the pain inside of pushing through to get to the other side, it is hard.
Yeah. It's my dad emailed me recently. My dad is really dope. Like, he's very, very intelligent, and he's a great writer. And so a lot of times when stuff is happening in his life, he thinks about it from a material perspective. Like, oh, that'd be great material. I should write something about, you know what I'm saying? Like, he uses it as inspiration and stuff. And he wrote me when just after, like, I think he wrote me just after the George Floyd incident. And so he was like, I'd really like to get your perspective on this. You know what I'm saying? Like, my dad is a white man from Texas in his late 70s. So his perspective on these things and my perspective on these things are usually different, but we have great conversation. We've had in-depth conversation about where we are as a society with the N-word and different things. But like, I always know that he's asking from a sincere place. So I like having these convos. And so he asked me recently that he wanted to have a conversation about all of the protests and where we stand. And he was like, there's been protests and stuff before, but this one feels like there's real lasting power to it. I think it's going to be different as we move forward from here. I'm eager to get your thoughts. And I was like, yo, I'm eager to talk to you about it. But then, like, I don't know, the next day, the day after that, and just a couple days, and then a couple weeks went by. And the more I hadn't reached out to him, the more shame I felt for it. I know I should have called my dad yesterday, like that kind of thing. And so it just led to a longer time. And then he finally reached out, and he was like, yo, I heard that you've been seeing a therapist. He just was expressing all this. He was proud of me. You know what I'm saying? He was like, I know that's not easy. And I understand if the reason I haven't heard from you is because you're dealing with the stuff between me and you right now, and you'd rather not talk because you're angry and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, we didn't get to you yet, but you know what I'm saying? But I don't know. I think that I am an advocate at this point. And I'm telling you, I'm really only like, I think today is my 5th session. I'm only a month or so in, but I'm an advocate. I think that it's imperative for people. I'm not saying everybody needs a therapist, but to be honest, most people probably do. At least a couple sessions just to do. There's something, no one ever taught us. We weren't taught how to properly process events and traumas and things as a child. You know what I'm saying? Like, you learn to suppress, you learn to bury, you learn to accept. But many of us haven't learned how to go through and move past and lay to rest those things. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And that's not a hit against our family or anybody around us. It just simply is, you know, people give you what they have. And most of us didn't grow up around people who were trained in how to do that. And so I'm just such an advocate for it because, like I said, I'm 40. I wish at 24, when I really started facing all this stuff, the first time I would have thought, you know, you should really go talk to somebody. But like I said, I was under the impression that because I forgave the people, I was over the event. I can separate the people from the event, but the event still has to be processed. And so here I am at 40 dealing with the aftermath. And I'm going to stick with it. I told my therapist, like, she's like, if this ever gets too uncomfortable and you need to provide, you need me to give you another way, I'm like, ain't no other way. And I was like, if I could do this on my own, I would have did it already. However you got to give it to me just like that. And if I don't like it, I'm going to do it anyway. And if I don't do a good job at it that week, when I come back next week, give me the same assignment until we get it. Because if I knew how to do it, I would have did it. Right. If I knew how to work through it, if I could have done it, if me and Jesus could have done it, me and Jesus would have done it already. And I'm not saying that God is not able to do. What I am saying is that I believe God put people like therapists in the earth to be a blessing to us. In the same way, I don't mind paying a mechanic to fix my car because they got certified in how to be good at it. I don't mind paying somebody to help me work through something that makes me a better me.
Right.
I'm all for it. I'm pro therapy to the core.
Pro therapy. Yes.
I'm serious. And I've recommended several other people, like, yo, remember that thing we talked about? You should probably see a therapist because I talked to mine about it. You know what I'm saying? And we're growing. So I do. I advocate for it. And I mean, like I said, I think one of the biggest places where it's going to hurt is that when you don't properly deal with you bubble over into those immediately around you. And you don't want to. You don't mean it. You can't help it. And you're like, yo, I did not mean this action or that statement or, you know, this look or that, you know, snide remark or whatever. But it's like, until you deal with you, that stuff is going to continue to happen. And I'm just, my children are young. My boys are 6 and 3. And I refuse to allow them to grow up with a father who's battling waves of depression over and over and is unhappy. I mean, I have moments, don't get me wrong. I'm not unhappy like I'm in the dumps. I don't mean that kind of unhappy. I just mean that I feel like people live from peak to peak. Mm-hmm. And I want to be happy in between the peaks. I want to make a hobby of being happy. You know what I'm saying? And so I don't want to just be happy from one event to the next. Oh, well, you make this much money. Now you make that much money. You should be happy. You know what I'm saying? Oh, you and your wife are doing great. Well, now y'all went on that vacation. You should be happy. Like, I don't want to live from event to event. I just want to be happy. If none of that stuff happened, I want to be happy. You know what I'm saying? But that only happens from being happy in myself. My wife is not doing anything that is leading to me not feeling fulfilled on the inside. It's got nothing to do with anything my wife or my children can do for me. It has to do with what I do for me. And so I think along the way, you know, in having a family, you seek to be a provider, you seek to be a lover, you seek to be a father, you seek to be a husband, you seek all these things. Oftentimes we as men lay down ourselves in order to do so. And so from a scriptural perspective, it sounds like it's the right thing to do because you're supposed to lay down your life for a friend. What greater love? You right? You know, no greater love have a man than one who would lay down his life for a friend. So you feel like I'm supposed to lay myself down. But the fact of the matter is the people who are in your life were attracted to being in your life for a reason because you were you. If you lay down you, then you're no longer any good to them anyway. Right. You know what I'm saying? If I have to lay down who I am in order for y'all to be who y'all are, then maybe we don't have the best relationship. And that's not my case. I'm just saying in general. And so for me, I'm realizing I sacrificed pouring into me the things that are innately Courtney. The things that before he was a father and a husband, the things that Courtney used to rock to that just made Courtney feel fulfilled. I laid those things down in order to become this father, this husband that I saw in my mind. But I sacrificed myself in order to be it. So now I'm trying to find the neutral space to reconcile the two so that I can pour into me, so I can be my best me. So when I pour into other people, they're actually getting what they came for and not the empty remnants of somebody who used to be me. I should write that down. That's fire.
You should.
I'm sending me the recording.
Yeah, I'm gonna send that to you.
I mean, I'm not saying I'm dope. I got that from on high, but I never said that out loud before.
Mm-hmm. That's hot. You know I love when you write, so I'm waiting for the best version of Courtney so we can get some more stuff.
I appreciate that.
Well, is there any last words that you would like to share?
Yeah, just one thing. I think that specifically for men and believers, you know, I know you have an audience that's broad, but specifically for male believers, I believe that the majority of us have this concept of that everything is spiritual. We'll pray about it. Okay, cool. Yeah, you should. But when I pray about decisions, God gives me instruction on what to do. I don't just pray and then God does. I pray and then God leads or instructs. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So if I'm praying about something that's not right and God says, go see a therapist, then that means that the answer for you is in the earth and he has somebody for you to go see. Like, I'm good with prayer. Trust me, we should absolutely spend time in prayer. We should absolutely pray without ceasing. We should pray daily. We should praise, spend time in praise. We spend time in worship. We should spend time in the word. All of that is essential to the walk of the disciple. But God put people in the earth to be the answer to people's problems. And so everything isn't spiritual. Your spirit is whole. You know what I'm saying? You're born again. Your spirit is whole. You've been filled with the Holy Spirit. Your spirit is whole. You have the teacher on the inside of you, but I'm telling you, the teacher may very well be teaching you to go find another human to help you deal with what's going on inside of you. So I'm encouraging brothers in the spirit, brothers in Christ, everything isn't spiritual. Some of this stuff needs to be worked out in your mind. And there are people that God has put in the earth to help you do it. So again, I'm a therapy advocate. And God bless your pastor, but your pastor is likely not that person. I'm not saying that he's not or that she's not. I'm just saying that, you know, this isn't all spiritual. Every answer is not in the scripture for some of this stuff. Some of this stuff simply needs to be worked through from somebody who understands the psychology of the mind of a man. So seek help, get help.
Seek help. Thank you for your time. And thank you guys for tuning in today. Like this video, comment, share it with all the men you know and all the women you know, but definitely all the men you know. We are definitely going to continue this, talking about those emotional triggers that we have and those abandonment issues, so that people can get the healing that they need and become the person that they were created to be. So we break these generational curses and we don't pour this stuff over onto our children. I love you guys. You have a great day. I'll talk to you later.